Good evening, my friends. This is Paul, and tonight I'll be reviewing for you Mario Tennis Fever for the Switch 2. So far during this channel's history, I have reviewed two other Mario Tennis games, those being Ultra Smash and Aces. And my opinions on those two games couldn't be farther apart. I thought that Ultra Smash was an absolute abomination, being almost as basic as Mario's Tennis on the Virtual Boy, and really not doing Nintendo any favors when the Wii U was at its lowest point. The only good things I could think about that game were the fundamental mechanics of the game were fun and the graphics were nice, but that was like the bare minimum. And they didn't really do anything other than that. Didn't even have an opening cutscene for that matter. Aces was a much better game, with a pretty decent adventure mode that even had some unique bosses, as well as nice mechanical depth with knowing when to do zone mode and when to use your special shots, and just maxing out that gauge was a lot of fun for figuring out when to do offensive and when to do defensive. As far as my opinions about Mario Tennis Fever, I would say it falls somewhere in the middle of those two games. Definitely better than Ultra Smash, but not quite as good as Aces. So let's talk about it. Now, one thing that people have complained about for recent Mario sports games for a while now is that they generally lack a lot of content. So when it was announced that this game would be $70, I bet most of you were thinking, oh, they better bring the content if they're going to charge the same as for Tears of the Kingdom. They sort of do. Like, when you look at the menu, there's certainly quite a lot more going on than there was in Ultra Smash and Aces. But, unfortunately, a lot of the modes just don't really live up to their full potential. Since I am an optimist, let's get out the worst modes first, so that I can talk about what I do like later, so that I don't end on a sour note. There's a mode where you can swing the Joy-Con instead of using buttons and stick controls. Now, this was in Mario Tennis Aces, and I wasn't the biggest fan of that mode, and I still don't like it here. You play with whichever Joy-Con is your dominant hand, and then your character moves automatically, and all you really do is swing when the ball is about to hit you, and then hold down the corresponding button when you want to do a special move, such as holding down X when you do a fever shot. And this worked alright, but sometimes it would read me moving my hand backwards to charge a shot as an actual shot. And it was also disappointing that there was no haptic feedback unless if you were blocking a fever shot. So like just hitting the ball with the Joy-Con, you didn't feel anything. So it didn't really feel immersive. Then there's the adventure mode, which I think was a lot of people's big selling point, as this is the reason why we picked this game up. Because Mario Tennis Aces had an adventure mode with experience points, a story, admittedly a very basic story, but it still had some decent concepts. But the world map was kind of lacking, as you just walked from one yellow line to another to get to the next event. Unfortunately, with this adventure mode, most of the time is spent on one of the longest and most drawn-out tutorials I have ever seen in a game, and that's saying something coming from someone who defends the tutorial in Twilight Princess. You spend probably about 2 or 3 hours at this tennis academy where a bunch of generic toads teach you how to play tennis, as if all the other modes in the game don't already have a guide before you start the match that tells you what each button combination does, making the whole thing feel very redundant. There are some cool mini-games that you play during this mode, but that's about the only charm that it has during this opening section. All of the toads have no differentiation besides different colors. One of them wears a suit because he's the headmaster, but you wouldn't know that unless the game blatantly spelled it out, because they're all the same height, no gender characteristics, and the voice lines just keep repeating over and over again. The talking flower is in this mode too, and he is also super annoying. No offense to Patrick Seitz, I think he did an amazing job. It's just that the lines that you do hear from the talking flower are used over and over again, and it's every single time you take a shot. Now, you can turn the Wonder Flower's dialogue off in the options menu, but they'll say that it can't be turned off in adventure mode or tournaments. Way to do a swing and a miss. It's a tennis game, get it? Nintendo games have historically been terrible with options menus, and this game is not really much different. But let's get back to the adventure mode. The Tennis Academy itself is pretty boring to actually explore. You end up basically running around in circles, as the game will say, go here, and then there will be this giant yellow exclamation mark pointing you exactly in the right direction, which is helpful. I generally like games to tell you where you need to go. The problem is that this academy is so small that I don't foresee anyone getting lost. The NPC dialogue is super generic. Sometimes it can be helpful when you're forced to take these mandatory quizzes that are way too easy. You get multiple choice, and if you get the question wrong, just try a different answer the next time. The toad will often say, oh, go talk to these people, and they'll give you the answers, but why even bother doing that when you can just keep spamming different answers every single time? The only thing that I found cool about this Tennis Academy was that the machines that registered you into the different minigames were shaped like FLUDD from Super Mario Sunshine. And that's about it. The production values for the adventure mode were all over the place as well. Like, sometimes you get these stills with narration telling you what's going on. Other times the characters are just standing on the screen in place, and the toads will narrate what's going on in the background so you don't really see anything happening. And then, there are full motion videos, but there's only 7 of them. In a $70 game, only 7 cutscenes? That is abysmal. Unless you count the opening cutscene. That is pretty cool, and it shows Mario and Bowser working together, so I did think that was very neat. But these opening cutscenes, I mean, I'm pretty sure Aces could have handled that. It doesn't feel like, oh, these cutscenes are $70 worthy. Now, the adventure mode does get better once you push your way through the academy. Eventually, you get to actually, go on an adventure, and there are some pretty decent challenges to be had, and some of the environments do look very nice. There's one grassy area where you can literally see every single blade of grass, which I always appreciate in games. The problem is that it's just too short after that. If you know what you're doing, you can breeze through it in probably like an hour or two. Additionally, just like in Mario Tennis Aces, you gain experience points even for losing a match. So eventually, if you just keep losing, you'll keep getting better by default. Now, when you're playing doubles in this mode, the AI computer opponent seems like it goes on a downward spiral of intelligence. When you first start playing doubles, your partner is unstoppable. You could probably have your partner do everything. But then, once you get to some of the later boss battles in the game, the AI just will not do the right thing. There's one boss that tries to hit you with this shot that kills you in one hit, and the AI never even attempts to block it. And so if you don't do the work, you're just going to have all of your teammates be clobbered by this boss, because they'll target your teammates before they target you, and if you try to stand in the way of the attack, it'll phase through you and hit your partner instead. Not to mention that if there's obstacles on the screen, like fire or ice, they'll just walk right into it. The final boss itself, while it had some decent attack patterns, was nowhere near as epic as the one in Mario Tennis Aces. In fact, the adventure mode in Aces, I would say as a whole, was generally a lot better. The challenges were more fun, the story, while minimalistic, still had some cool twists that are nowhere to be found here. Really, the coolest thing that happens in this adventure mode is in the opening cutscene, where Mario and the gang get turned into babies, and that's the whole reason why they're at the academy for so long, is that they've lost all their adult strength and they need to rebuild all of their tennis skills so that they can actually hit the ball over the net. And the entire quest is just, how do we get back to our normal forms? Credit where credit is due. This is the game that introduced Baby Waluigi, and Kevin Afghani nails the delivery. I feel like he really gets how these characters would sound in their baby forms. And it kind of makes me feel bad whenever I have to face them in a tennis match, because I'm like, I know that they're technically adults in a baby form, but I still feel weird having to hurt a baby. Now, as far as the actually good modes, we have tournament mode, which is decent. I mean, it's a tournament. I don't really know how else to describe it. There's a separate tournament for doubles and singles, and then you'll gradually increase in difficulty as you go along. But unfortunately, there's just no payoff to these tournaments. You win one, and then you get a JPEG image of a trophy superimposed over the screen, as opposed to some kind of award ceremony like they used to do in the old games. Then there's the Trial Tower, which has these preset custom matches that you have to face all in a row with only 3 hearts. Every time you lose a heart, and when you lose all 3, you have to start all the way at the bottom. And I hated this mode. I beat the first set of challenges, but on the second, when they would have me go 5 floors down and repeat the same old challenges over and over again, but without the experience points from the adventure mode, I just said to heck with this. My review criteria is that once I see the credits, that typically means I've beaten the game, and I did see the credits in the adventure mode, so I just said, well, there's a mode that tells you how to get all the unlockables, and nothing in there screamed you must beat Trial of Towers to get this super cool thing. So it felt like it was a neat way to sort of add Super Smash Bros. Melee's event mode into the game, as there are some cool scenarios that you don't see anywhere else. Like a scene where you're playing as one blooper and you have 2 small blooper teammates against 1 Rosalina. I thought that was pretty cool because you don't usually see triples in a tennis game. So I think if you like those kinds of wacky tennis matches, then this is the one for you. The regular tennis mode is pretty alright. You have a really great roster of characters. Not quite as out there as Mario Kart World, but you do have a lot of Mario mainstays, while you also have some Mario enemies that are joining the fray. Now, don't expect too much radical, like, oh wow, this character has never before been seen. Really, the only new character here is Baby Waluigi, which is poetic, considering that 26 years ago, Waluigi made his debut in Mario Tennis 64. So a baby version of Waluigi is making his debut here. But apart from that, you've seen all these enemies and characters before. Although, one thing that I did really appreciate is that this game confirms that Kate Higgins did not retire from the role of Pauline. I think it's just that Jenny Kidd was needed to sing all those complex Bonanza lyrics in Donkey Kong Bonanza. Either that, or they're going to make Jenny Kidd voice teenage Pauline and Kate will voice the adult one, but it's nice to have her back, as Pauline is my main in this game. Now, as far as the central mechanics of the game, it's more or less the same as in Ultra Smash and Aces, just without all the zone shot stuff, and also without the colored icons on the court that Ultra Smash had, where it would tell you which button to press. You have to really consider your opponent's position in relativity to the net, in relativity to yourself, and determine what would be the appropriate shot to make it harder for your opponent to fight back. Now, the name of the game is Mario Tennis Fever, and where that comes in is that you can select your own racket. There's even a mode where you can switch between rackets between the serves. And when your fever meter has filled up, you can unleash a special shot that corresponds to whichever racket you picked up. So it's essentially like the power shots in Mario Power Tennis, but racket specific as opposed to character specific. So for example, if you have the fire bar racket, then it'll make fire bars appear on your opponent's side. Or if you have the ink racket, there can be ink that splatters on your screen. And these are really cool, and they're a lot of fun to collect. And it's fun to mix and match with them, and like when you're playing in doubles, you can even select the rackets that your opponents and your teammates do, which I thought that was a cool touch. There weren't too many rackets that I didn't like. The only thing I was disappointed in is that it kind of diminishes personalities of the individual characters. Like in Mario Power Tennis, every single character had a unique animation when pulling off a power shot, and that was sort of preserved in Mario Tennis Aces, even if they weren't as referential, except for Pauline's. I liked how she jumped on a skyscraper and sang Jump Up Superstar. But here, you just get some fancy effects. Now, the way that these work is that when you press the X button, your character will run towards the ball. It doesn't always work, so make sure you're close enough. And then time will briefly slow down for just a little bit. And then you push the control stick in the general direction that you want to hit the ball. So you can't like zone in on the exact spot like you could in Aces. But here's the catch. Your opponent can block your shots if they hit the ball before it hits the ground. And so you can keep up a volley going. And the HD rumble when you're hitting the ball back and forth is quite nice here to make up for the lack of haptic feedback elsewhere. Whoever's side of the court the fever ball lands on is who will get the negative effects. So say you're the one who unleashes a fiery attack, but your opponent blocks it and it lands on your side of the court, then you will be punished by your own racket. So it's important to consider, again, your opponent's position on the field and hit it to just the right location. As far as the courts themselves, there's a bit of a mixture as to how they work. The game flat out tells you what all the courts are, and unlocking them is ridiculously simple. There's the regular tennis matches, which are basically just aesthetic scenery. Like if you like this court better than another, and some will have different bounce speeds and how fast the ball will go. But in special matches, that's where you get to see more of the crazy gimmicks that Mario Power Tennis was known for. In special matches, you'll play with unique rules that you don't really get in the normal mode. And I guess you could say these are the new gimmick courts. My personal favorite is the Wonder Court, which is a huge love letter to Super Mario Bros. Wonder, where the orange talking flower from Mario Wonder will sometimes commentate if you have him on. And the scenery looks like it's straight out of Prince Florian's castle courtyard. The music is even taken straight from Wonder, which is a great touch. But then midway through the match, there's a Wonder Flower that appears above the net, and when the ball hits it, it'll trigger one of 3 Wonder effects, and you have to gather as many Wonder Seeds as possible to win the match. I didn't really like the Hoppos one, as it was very chaotic and hard to figure out what you were doing. But it was nice that they incorporated Spiky Dance Number and Piranha Plants on Parade into a tennis setting. I thought that was really clever. It honestly made me feel like this alone is probably why it was $70, is because it gets really hectic during these Wonder effects, and the Switch 2 never slows down. As far as I could tell, the game ran at 60 frames per second the whole time, and even when multiple fever effects were going on at the same time, because sometimes they can overlap, the game still performed admirably. However, there's one area of Mario Tennis Fever that will very much depend on your online connection, and that's of course playing with friends. Now there are quite a lot of options to do this. There's local play, there's game share, there's joining lobbies with randos, and what I did, because I do not like playing with randos, I played against my friend. And it was pretty fun, because even on intermediate difficulty, the computer players are pretty smart with knowing how to block the ball. It was nice to be against a human opponent who clobbered me most of the time, but I did win one of the matches, and the other match I came close to winning. And I felt like once we turned on the gimmick courts, it gave me more of a chance because the gimmicks were more unpredictable and they were attacking both of us as opposed to him just dominating the court with his fever rackets. I would say that I generally agree with most of the critic reviews that say that the single player mode is an absolute drag, but the multiplayer is quite wonderful, depending on how good you are at tennis. But he was saying that he really liked how we had some good volleys going. He was trying to give me praise, and as someone who is a bit of a self-deprecator, I took it as a huge compliment. Overall, I think the way that Mario Tennis Fever handles its unlockables is cool in theory, but for players that like to be surprised, it kind of ruins any sense of anticipation. There's a mode that tells you what all the unlockables are and how to unlock them, which is cool. It's kind of like the checklist that Kirby Air Ride came up with, just not as cool looking. But on the other hand, if you were like, I want to be surprised by all the characters I unlock, you're not going to want to look at this menu. But it can also make the game seem like it's shallower than it is. Like when you see how many unlockable courts there are, you're like, oh, that's it? For a $70 game? And most of the courts that are there are just variations of the standard court. The gimmick courts were really cool, and they paid a lot of tribute to cool source material. Like there's one based on Waluigi Pinball that is too chaotic for me, but I love the source material, and I especially loved how the Waluigi model in the background used the graphics from the Mario Kart 8 Deluxe Booster Course Pass. And the general lighting was also taken from that game as well. Mario Tennis Fever was a lot of fun. I really liked mixing and matching with the rackets, and the fever mechanics were pretty cool, even if I missed some of the crazier tech that you could do in Mario Tennis Aces. The adventure mode was a real drag, with a couple of cool moments here and there, but the Tennis Academy bit was just way too overdone and redundant, considering that the game tutorializes you elsewhere. Now you might be thinking, well Paul, there have been Mario Tennis RPGs in the past. The difference is that those games had original characters, and you would work your way up to the Mushroom Kingdom to see, oh, so that's why it's called Mario Tennis. Whereas in this, most of the characters that you meet are just toads or bad guys with no unique designs. The most you're going to get is a couple of enemies with new elemental types that have never been seen before, but the overall design hasn't changed a bit. So it's really unfortunate that it seems like Nintendo still hasn't gotten to the point where they trust their third-party studios to commit to new designs and new bosses and creative stuff like they did in Aces. So it makes me prefer Aces overall, even if I think Mario Tennis Fever is a better showcase of what the Switch 2 is capable of, with so many special effects bouncing around the screen and some decent looking graphics, even if it's nothing we probably couldn't have seen on the Switch, just maybe a little bit blurrier. Now, as stated at the beginning of this video, this game costs $70, and that's an absolute ripoff. I would recommend you either wait for this to go on sale to like $20 or $30, or just rent it like I did. I had maybe about 3 days worth of enjoyment out of this, and for a $70 game, that is abysmal. So if you know something like GameFly or the library, just pick it up, take your fill, and then turn it back in. I hope I didn't sound too negative, as I do want to stress I do really like this game. I just don't love it. And considering that it took about 8 years for this to come after Aces, it was kind of a disappointment. But the good moments were good, and it is fun in short bursts, but just not fun enough to actually want to own the game, unless if you really like the multiplayer. So with that, thank you very much for watching, my friends. If I left anything out, please let me know in the comments, and I will answer all of your questions. And until the next time, remember to keep the faith, stay epic, and God bless. Bye! Also, I did this in one take, so I guess I aced it? Anyway, see you later.